Grassley.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Mr. Secretary. There are several reports of foreign nations like China purchasing U.S. land for farming or agricultural purposes. Some of these tracts of land are suspiciously close to American military bases or critical infrastructure sites. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States expressed great concern in a North Dakota purchase of farmland by China is one example of their concern. How is Homeland Security working with the Department of Agriculture and law enforcement entities to track these types of suspicious land purchases?
Senator Grassley, we are very focused on the threat that the People's Republic of China poses to the United States in a number of regards. You have cited one of them. And we are a member of CFIUS, the Committee for Foreign Investment in the U.S. We are one of the departments that reviews potential transactions to assess the threat that a transaction poses, not only in isolated context, but in the aggregate, the threat it poses to the security of the United States. And we seek to impose measures on the transaction to mitigate any threat successfully. And if that threat cannot be adequately mitigated through the measures that we take, then it would be our recommendation to prevent the transaction from occurring.
As a follow-up, do you have a way of notifying relevant parties that may be targets to possible espionage from these purchases?
There is a very established process that the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, follows with respect to the transactions and the committee's engagement with the parties to the transaction.
Over 2 years ago, on February the 11th, 21, I wrote to you and asked these questions, and I'll repeat these questions later on. The first question was whether the Department of Homeland Security considers Confucius institutes and their affiliates to be an extension of the Communist Chinese government, and two, if the department believed them to be purveyors of Communist Chinese government propaganda. I would hope the answers to those questions would be obvious to anybody in the Biden administration. We all know that the national security threats that Confucius institutes posed, and we can draw that conclusion based upon what the Chinese government's own words say about these institutions. And many educational institutions have already shut down their Confucius institutes. And yet, when you answered my February letter, July 29th of 21, you personally responded and failed to answer the critical questions. So I'm going to pose these questions to you again. Whether the Department of Homeland Security considers Confucius institutes and their affiliates to be an extension of the Communist Chinese government, and if the department believes them to be purveyors of Communist Chinese propaganda.
Senator, we are very concerned about the institutes that you mentioned. In fact, we are very concerned about the PRC's use of what we call non-traditional collectors of intelligence. It is why we are working with the Department of State to ensure that our visa system is secure as against that threat.
Well, for any college, university, or other educational institution in the United States that maintains such an institute connected with China, would you advise those educational institutions to close them based on national security reasons? If not, why not?
Senator, we work, as do others in the United States government, work with institutions of higher learning to inform them of the threat that the PRC poses and to deliver recommended safeguards to guard against that threat.
Okay. Let me go back to one of those first two questions I asked you just to get clarification. Do you believe these institutes to be purveyors of Communist Chinese government propaganda?
I am very concerned that many of them are indeed, Senator, and we seek to guard against the realization of that threat.
Then going back to something, I was going to ask you a whole series of questions that Senator Graham already answered, but one that I want to follow up on is for the committee's record, would you describe which foreign drug cartels control areas of the southern border and the areas they control?
The two cartels, Senator, that are of greatest concern to us are the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel as the primary traffickers of synthetic opioids, including the deadly fentanyl.
Okay. Multiple inspectors general have found the Department of Homeland Security failed to fully vet and screen Afghan evacuees before entering the United States. In one report, the Defense Department Inspector General said that 50 evacuees in the United States pose potential significant national security concerns. How many Afghan evacuees are currently in the country who pose potential or actual national security concerns?
Senator, I respectfully disagree with certain aspects of the Inspector General reports that you referenced, and I would be pleased to provide you and your staff with a briefing with respect to the security screening and vetting that we performed with respect to the Afghan nationals who were seeking relief in the United States and the disposition of those individuals.
I respectfully disagree with you that this is classified and you can't answer it in this setting, but I'll go on to another question. Does the Department of Homeland Security know the location of these Afghan evacuees in the United States who pose a potential national security threat? And if you don't know where they are, why you don't know where they are?
Senator, if an individual poses a national security threat, that individual is either removed from the United States or detained.
So
if there are other reasons for either of those dispositions to not occur, then that is something that I can share with you in an appropriate briefing.
Did you just tell me in your answer that there's none of these evacuees that are a serious threat to the United States?
No, Senator, what I would like to make clear, if I wasn't clear initially, is that we screen and vet individuals before they arrive. If an individual does arrive and we determine that the individual presents either a public safety or a national security threat, we will place that individual in removal proceedings and seek to detain that individual. If that disposition is not reached, there may be considerations why that is so, and I would welcome the opportunity to brief you on that more specifically.
Well, do you coordinate with the FBI's ongoing assessment and investigation of Afghan evacuees in the United States?
Yes, we most certainly do.
Okay. On January the 23rd this year, Senator Johnson and I sent a letter to the Secret Service requesting visitor logs for President Biden's residence. Our letter, in part, is part of a review that we began 2 years ago of President Biden's compliance with federal records laws dating back to the time that he was vice president. Our request was also based on news reports that the Secret Service was prepared to turn those records over to Congress pursuant to a request. Since then, my and Senator Johnson's staff have been told that your department's Office of General Counsel is the barrier to the Secret Service producing relevant material to Congress. It appears that the Office of General Counsel is being used to shield and frustrate and obstruct congressional oversight. What steps have you instructed the Office of General Counsel to take to produce the requested material to me and Senator Johnson? And what legal barriers exist to producing these Secret Service visitors' logs to Congress if they can't be given to Congress?
Senator, two things. Number one, the directive that I have issued is for our department to cooperate and comply with our oversight responsibilities and the requests that are made of us. And two, it is certainly false that the Office of General Counsel serves as a barrier to that cooperation and compliance.
Sounds to me like we'll get those records in, is that right?
I don't know whether the Secret Service maintains visitor logs of the president's residence, but if they do and those have been requested, we will comply with the law.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Grassley.